Okay, hey, good morning, everybody. I descended into the tomb. I probably shouldn't stay long. The roof doesn't look as strong as it once was, and I don't think I'm supposed to be here. Um, but our our story is going to take place here today in chapter 18 by the Dark River. We know that Sheftu, Djet, and the two diggers, Kamwas and Usur, came down into the tomb. They're at the door, in fact, right now when we left them at chapter 17. Unfortunately, the guard was killed, and that was a sad situation because, again, he was just doing his job, and he was doing it well. He was a very dedicated guard in the Valley of Kings, and he died, unfortunately. All right, so here we are. Let's see how they're going to come into the tomb, steal the treasure, as much treasure as they can carry, and then escape. And what are they going to do with the guard's body? What are they going to do? They got to go past the guard shack again. Okay. Anyway, let's get through this. Chapter 18 by the Dark River. This is where it starts getting interesting. So please pay attention, and then you'll appreciate it. It was an hour before the clang of shovels ceased. Sheftu, sitting on a rock some yards away, was aware of eerie silence and raised his head. The torch flared wild and lonely against the night, revealing a gap in the rubble and a stone stairway leading downward into obscurity. At the top stood Djet and the sweating diggers, their eyes upon him. Slowly he rose and walked across the sands, taking the torch from the priest. At the bottom of the steps was a plastered-covered door, imprinted with the royal with the royal seal of the necropolis and the cartouche of the first Thutmose. A tremor passed through Sheftu at the sight of the familiar hieroglyphs of the old king's name, enclosed in their oval line. He and the prince had stood on this spot long ago, on the day of entombment, to see that the seal pressed into the wet plaster. His lips parted, but it was moments before he could force himself to speak. Not even thy prince should demand such a crime. Open it, he said. The diggers crept past him down the steps. Under their chisels, the plaster crumbled in an irregular crack, gradually outlining the door. At his elbow, Djet was whispering, Anubis, strike us not. We have plaster to mend it. We bear the royal seal. All shall be as it was when we have gone. Sheftu found it hard to breathe. The portal, which was to have remained closed and inviolate for 3,000 years, was swinging open before him, with a creak that woke echoes far back in the depths of the tomb. A breath of stale, dry air drifted out and enveloped him. Slowly, every step an act of will, he descended the stairs and passed through the door into the habitation of the dead. He stood in a tiny entry where the stone floor was strewn with flowers. He remembered them, the last offering of the funeral party returning to the upper world. They looked only a little withered, as if no more than a week had passed since they had been dropped here. But when he touched one with his toe, it fell into dust so fine there was no trace left. Shivering a little, he raised the torch. Pleading texts from the Book of the Dead leaped at him from the close cavern walls. I have not committed iniquity against men. I have not oppressed the poor. I have not starved any man. I have not made any to weep. I have not committed that which is an abomination to the gods. I have not turned back the water in its season. I have not put out the fire in its time, since I know the names of the gods who are with thee in the hall of double truth. Save thou me from them, Osiris. I am pure, I am pure, I am pure. Before Sheftu, another flight of steps led downward into darkness. With Djedut pressing at his side and the diggers with their baskets crowding at his heels, he started the long descent, going down, 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 down. They crept into night so black the torch was but a moving spark, into silence so deep the ears rang with it. Staler and more oppressive grew the air, the same air left here years ago when the outer door was shut and sealed. Was there enough for 4 men breathing hard with fear? Sweat masked Sheftu's face, only to evaporate instantly in the shriveling dryness of the place, drawing his skin and stiffening his lips. In vain, he tried to keep his mind away from the thought of the millions of tons of rock and earth above them. The deeper they went, the more ponderous grew the weight, the more stifling his awareness of it. The steps ended at last in the depths of the earth. The men stopped a moment, hearing their own breathing loud in the silence. All were loath to leave the stair, which now seemed known and safe. Sheftu's thoughts flashed back to the guard, lying so still under the stars far above them, and to the guard's comrades at the valley entrance, who might be starting to search for him, wondering why he had not returned. A sense of urgency possessed Sheftu. They must hasten, or the alarm would be raised and they'd crawl out at last into a trap. Fighting his reluctance, he led the way out across a stony floor, one pace then another, then a third, with the light flickering into the black void. Suddenly a vivid figure, twice the height of a man, sprang out of the gloom. The trespassers recoiled at a blow, and a sound that was half grunt, half moan broke from the digger Usur. It was some seconds before Sheftu could bring himself to raise the torch and discover that the terrifying figure was one of a procession of painted along the walls of what appeared to be a lofty and spacious corridor. Sheftu forced himself to steadiness, to memory of this corridor from the day of the old king's entombment. Then gripped the torch, he started down the long hall. More and more brilliantly painted figures slid past them in the wavering light. A group of women bent in mourning, with disheveled hair, slaves bearing treasure boxes and furniture. Dignitaries pacing behind a canopied sledge on which rested a great sarcophagus. It was the old pharaoh's funeral procession, depicted faithfully in every detail, climaxed at the far end of the hall by the last solemn ritual of the opening of the mouth. There, framing the door, rose the painted figure of a Sem priest with his mystic tool, while opposite him the jackal-headed god Anubis supported the mummy. Djedut began to chant in a low, unsteady monotone, in peace, unto the great God. Proceed in peace, unto thy tomb in the necropolis, in peace, unto the land of the west, and thy dwelling on the dark Nile. His voice sounded thin and strange in the heavy stillness. The torch and its huddled bearers moved between the towering figures and under the lintel of the door. Before them lay more stairs leading down, always downward and inward into darker mystery, thicker silence. In peace, in peace. The priest's voice was a thread of sound, now muffled against the narrow sides of the stair, now hollow and unreal across a passage, rippling as the torchlight rippled along the cavern walls. It was as if he could not stop, though the monotony of its beat like the little hammers upon Sheftu's brain. He himself was concentrating fiercely, racking his memory at every point where the passage branched. The branchings seemed numberless, and only one was right. The others would lead to pitfalls or blind alleys, traps of confusion set by the old king's architects for just such intruders as they. Remember, there's like traps in here to prevent tomb robbers. Each time, Sheftu forced himself to pause, choose painstakingly before leading on. He tried to quicken his pace, nagged by the thought of the guard, but the craving to turn back dragged at his feet in spite of him. In peace unto the land of the west. They had come to a doorway. Across its threshold lay the first storeroom, a large chamber crowded beyond the reach of the smoky light with the possessions of the dead. Here were chariots, dismantled and stacked along one wall. There a great golden couch, an ebony throne. Everywhere carven chairs and tables, stools, headrests, chests and boxes of clothing, all moveless, but somehow waiting. The torch flickered in the still dead air, but when Sheftu slowly extended it, the walls came alive with rows of painted servants, copper-skinned, white-clad, bearing trays of fruit and meat, jars of wine, platters of bread. Sheftu stared up at them. It was here the house of the king began in earnest, and these were his servants. Sheftu knew well they were no longer the mere painted outlines they had been on that day long ago when he had walked here grieving beside the prince, when the air was still heavy with the funerary myrrh and flowers, the priests still droning. The moment the wine of the last libation had dried upon the floor and the silent dark closed in, these figures had been transformed, transmuted, quickened with that mysterious other life, which called their cause out of the paint and plaster to be the wraith-like servants of the dead king. Sheftu shivered. What right had he, the living, to look upon them now? The painted figures come alive, they believed, when the tomb was closed and shut to help guide and help serve the pharaoh in death. Allow us to pass, O Ka of the pharaoh. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was Djet. Allow us to pass, O Ka of the pharaoh, he whispered. We leave undisturbed your furniture and linen. We leave your slaves to serve you, your chariots to carry you through the shining streets. Djet's mumbling grew more urgent. In peace, unto the great God proceed in peace, unto the tomb of the necropolis in peace, in peace. Through that chamber, and the next, they moved, while awareness of the dead king grew always stronger as the torchlight shone over more and more of his possessions. His presence was everywhere about them now, in the jars of honey and unguent sealed with his cartouche, in the shelves bearing his favorite joints of meat, in the sandals he had worn, the spear he had flung, the tiny boxes that held his eye paint. All of that stuff is buried with the pharaoh, so he can use it in the afterlife. Every step led them near to him. On the walls were his fowlers, his herdsmen, his fishermen dragging their brimming nets, men threshing his grain or pressing out his wine or fashioning his golden collars, all workers laboring ceaselessly for the royal call, all shocked, motionless by the desecrating glare of the torch and the footsteps of living men. Sheftu's lips were parched, his nerves taut as bowstrings. Was the thin air growing harder to breathe, or were the angry hands of Kefs squeezing at his lungs? An eternity must have passed since they left the starry night far, far above. Deject touched his arm suddenly. Ahead lay a door, the final door, for golden statues of the goddess Isis guarded on either side. They shone fiercely yellow in the torchlight as the intruders drew nearer. They blinded the eye with their hot glitter, but they did not strike. Sheftu heard the harsh breathing of Usur behind him as they passed under the upraised staffs and across the threshold of the last and holiest chamber, the heart of the tomb. There they stopped. Even Deject's chanting ceased at last. Profound and utter silence closed over them as they stood amid a still magnificence. The room was filled with treasure. Everywhere coffers, chests, carven boxes spilled it out upon the floor. Jewels and satin, ebony, ivory, pale electrum, tall alabaster vases, hollowed to fragile translucence. But above all, gold, yellow gold that winked and gleamed and glinted from every corner of the chamber. At first, Sheftu could see nothing else. Half dazzled, he dragged his eyes from the glitter. Before him a path had been swept clean through the rich profusion. At its end, 2 life-size statues of maidens stood, 1 foot advanced. Their dresses shimmered with silver and carnelian, and they held baskets of foodstuffs in their golden arms. These were the gentle Ushabti, closest guardians of the king. They were radiant in the light, with their shining brows and their ageless eyes of lapis lazuli. Between them loomed the huge sarcophagus, veiled by a linen pall so sheer the pink granite showed through its folds. On the wall behind it, the great god Osiris himself welcomed the king's soul to paradise, while on the other walls, a host of deities in mystic headdresses were lined in overpowering grandeur. Sheftu sank to his knees, no longer able to withstand his awe. He felt all sense of time and memory fade away. All objects blur except the tranquil faces of the Ushabti and the sarcophagus they guarded. Here was the ultimate moment, perhaps his last, for he was in the presence of the dead. A strange rustling sounded in his ears. Was it the Kefs, dark wings, or the thundering of his own heart? Nay, it was neither. Sheftu's mind sprang awake. Full in the stealthy shuffle of palm leaf sandals, Usur the digger was creeping past him, his profile rigid, his gaze fixed, unswerving on the golden statues. He held a rock in his upraised hand. In a flash, Sheftu knew his purpose. He meant to smash the eyes of the Ushabti so that they could not watch what was to come. Okay, we'll see. Sheftu leaped for him, struggling to wrest the weapon from his hand. The man made no sound, but his strength was terrible. In utter silence, the two strained together while the light flickered and danced crazily upon the walls. Hampered by the torch, Sheftu was already sinking to his knees in the moment it took for Kamwas and the priest to overpower Usur and pin him fast. Sheftu staggered to his feet and seized the rock, holding it poised over his sweating victim's forehead in a fist that trembled with longing to smash it down. "Stay thy hand, my lord," came Deject's low voice. "Not every man can bear his fear." Slowly, Sheftu's arm came down. His fury faded. It was true. He could not have borne his own tonight save for the purpose which so consumed him that he could give heed to nothing else. He shook his head, trying to steady his thoughts. This Usur was a sound enough fellow in the world of daylight, a weaver, well respected and as courageous as the next one. But what man was prepared to defy the very gods? It was not this man who broke that was surprising. It was his companion who still held staunch. In the wonder, Sheftu turned to Kamwas and saw the answer written on his broad and humble face. It was Sashai whom Kamwas followed with blind devotion, though he led straight into the land of darkness. Sheftu put a hand on the massive shoulder, then turned to Usur, who do not touch the Washpati. You must not blind the guardians of the Pharaoh and leave him defenseless against his enemies. We come here to rob. We come here not to rob, but to rescue Egypt. Do you understand? The gods have not struck us yet, and perhaps they will not. He motioned to Jet to loose the man, suddenly feeling so weary he could scarcely stand. Much still lay ahead. There was a treasure to sort, their funerary offerings to set out in place of the gold they took, the baskets to fill and carry through the rooms and along the stairs and the passages back to the upper world. Then the outer door to plaster over and mark with the royal seal. Aye, and what of the guard? Before they sealed the door, they would have to carry him down into the first little flower-strewn chamber. The ways of the gods were strange. This common guard, distinguished by naught save his stubbornness, had exchanged his life for Egypt's and would sleep forever on the doorstep of royalty. In other words, he's going to be buried here in a royal tomb, even though he's a commoner. Unless, of course, he had been missed by his comrades. The thought prodded Sheftu's tired mind once more. Make haste, he muttered. Pick out the heaviest gold. He never knew how long they labored there below the towering images of the gods, weighing the treasure in their palms, packing the massive cups and crowns and chains and collars in the bottom of the baskets, the jewels and necklaces on top. For Sheftu, their work took on the unreality of a fevered dream in which only the cold weight of gold and the sound of labored breathing went on unchanging. He was near exhaustion. The struggle with Usur had nearly drained his strength, already taxed by days of strain and a night of unbearable tensions. His anxiety swirled about him, the guard, the passing of time, the uncertainty of getting out of the valley, and above all, the deep hatred of what he was doing. Every move he made, every cup and every goblet he plucked from its place did violence to a lifetime of stern teaching. But it is not for ourselves. It is for the king, he told himself. Better we die than Egypt. Mother of truth, how hard it was to breathe. Sheftu dragged himself erect, a gold chain dripping from his hand, and frowned toward the stone urn into which he had thrust the torch. The flame burned murky and uneven. Was it nearly used up? Or had their hungry lungs consumed the air it too required to live? Kamwas, light a fresh torch, ordered Sheftu. The big man straightened, stared blankly at the torch, then paled. Master, he whispered, we did not bring another. Uh-oh, they only brought one torch. The room grew painfully still. Every mind was filled with a new fear, so fundamental that it swallowed all the rest. The fear of the dark. Here below the earth, darkness was total, absolute, unnatural. They remembered too well how it had followed and surrounded them through the whole descent, a formless monster held at bay only by their tiny flame. They remembered the black labyrinth awaiting them now, the windings, the echoing halls and stairways, the lonely passages that led nowhere through which they must journey back. There was a low moan from Usur. The wildness was coming over him again, and Sheftu lashed as his tired will to combat it. No matter, his voice sounded strange. He fought to steady it, though his tongue felt thick and numb. This one will do. But there is little air left here. Hurry. To his relief, the need for haste submerged Usur's panic. They fell upon the gold with redoubled effort. But Sheftu's eyes slid back to the torch. Perhaps it was only air it lacked. Perhaps it would burn bright again when they left this chamber where they had worked and breathed too long. The baskets were nearly full now. The room, stripped of its glitter, looked stark and somber. You must take what is his, even to the royal cobra and the collar of amulets. Sheftu's head throbbed. He turned slowly to the sarcophagus, running his tongue over his lips without changing their dryness. Be ruthless. It must be done, he told himself. He beckoned to Jet with a faint jerk of his head. Together they hurried down the clean-swept path, past the Ushbati, to the spreading edge of the pall. Sheftu lifted it grimly, afraid to pause an instant. They're opening the sarcophagus, the coffin of the dead king, Thutmose himself. Avoiding each other's eyes, the two men seized the heavy lid and struggled to turn it diagonally on its base. It would not budge. Usur, come with us, Jet panted. The diggers came, laid hold. Nothing mattered now but haste. The dying torch, the dark, under the straining of 8 strong arms, the thick slab grated, inched outward with a horrid grinding of stone on stone, and turned at last to lay open a triangular area in its head, at its head. The torch was guttering lower and lower. Sheftu did not look upon the dead king's face, but plunged his arms blindly into the dark cavity of the coffin. They came out laden with gold, solid gold amulets worth a prince's ransom. He forced himself to grope once more to find the heavy circlet with its golden cobra that bound the forehead. He drew it forth, shining gold. Now, he whispered. Once more the shoulders strained in frantic haste. The torch sputtered feebly, choked. The lid grated into place. Sheftu flung the pall across it, sprang with the others for the baskets and the torch. They fled, their starved lungs dragging at the air. Through the doorway, I can't see because my book is ripped, underneath the upraised golden staffs of the twin Isis statues, in and out among the furniture and piles of weapons that littered the floor, on into the next chamber, past the painted fishermen, the threshers, the endless shelves of goods, down the passage and up 3 stairs and on. Nay, wait. Sheftu halted, panting. He thrust out the torch, staring at the walls ahead of him, the stairs behind. The light shone dully across the opening of a second passage. This way. He swerved into it, all his flesh crawling. It would have been so easy to miss it altogether. He must go more slowly, be sure that every turn was right. But if he lagged, what of the torch? He looked up at it anxiously. The air seemed better now, but still the flames sank. It was not the lack of air then. The torch itself was all but gone. Faster, faster, but take care. You see the conundrum? Got to go faster because they need to get out because the torch is going to burn out. But they can't go too fast, so they make a mistake and go into the wrong place and get lost and trapped in here forever. One of the diggers stumbled on a threshold, and his heavy basket lurched sideways, spilling a stream of gold. With a curse, Sheftu was on his knees, scooping up the chains and amulets, a fragile bracelet, a necklace ornamented with golden bees. Leave it, gasped Jet, himself snatching up a handful or two and stuffing them into the basket. Leave the rest, go on. Sheftu groped once more, swept a fortune into a fold of his cloak, and left another where it lay as he staggered to his feet. They fled on past the pile of dismantled chariots and the great couches, away from the mysterious painted presence of the servants on the walls, through a corridor around a murky bin. The gloom swept closer suddenly, loomed like a monster over them. Sheftu stopped, unable to see the passage at his feet. All eyes went to the torch, just as the last flame sickened and dropped to nothing. A red coal glowed on for a moment, deepened to crimson as the swirling dark closed in, then died. Blackness engulfed them. The torch went out, and they're not out of the tomb yet. So they've got to find a way out in pitch black, like the kind of black where you cannot see your hand in front of your face, the kind of black that is complete, total, and absolute. There is no little bit of light at all. All right. So we'll see tomorrow how, if and how Chef 2 manages this situation. All right, guys. Until then, we'll see you tomorrow. You take care of yourselves, and Osiris will take care of us all. I don't know what that means. All right. Bye, guys.